Good evening, everyone. The time is now 6:05, and the date is February 18th, 2025. And this evening, the Town Council is hosting a work session with the Affordable Housing Trust Collaborative and the Land Conservancy Trust to discuss a transferable tax and other tax options to scaffold affordable housing and land trust funds. So I would happily turn it over to both the representatives from Affordable Housing Trust and Land Conservancy Trust to provide us with a general background of what it is that you're working on.
Thank you, Mr. President. Terry Fleming, Chair of the Land Conservancy Trust. Appreciate the time. We wanted this workshop. We actually would respectfully ask that the council, if they really are serious about vetting this issue down the road, that we have another workshop, because this, I know that you're under the gun for 7 o'clock, and we're not going to be able to get through all the information that we would need to get through. So hopefully we can schedule a second workshop on an off-council week, if that's possible. Having said that, I just want to make some preliminary remarks and then turn it over to Cliff Tyler from the Affordable Housing Trust. And some of our members may want to make comments as well. The Land Trust and the Affordable Housing Trust have been working jointly and individually for a period of months, if not more than that, on essentially generating additional sources of revenue in order to fund our two missions. One is to buy land and develop affordable housing properties. The other is to buy open space. We both have certain funds available, as you know. Voters, I believe, passed a $3 million bond for affordable housing that has to be invoked, and there's a timely process to getting that money. If Land Trust also still has a $1 million bond available that has not been triggered yet, but is available, but again, it's a timely process. We also have, the Land Trust has approximately $500,000 in reserve at this point to buy land. Now, people may agree or disagree, but our view is all that money is insufficient to go forward and develop and acquire substantial properties under the missions of both boards. So we are looking for additional sources of revenue. We've considered a number of things that other cities and towns have done, and not only in Rhode Island, but in other states. And one of the items, and this is, Cliff and I have discussed this for a while. Tonight, in 45 minutes, we can't get into all the weeds. But one of the items is a tax, and again, I'll defer to others what it's officially called, but it's a tax that's paid by anybody that buys properties in the town, in any town in Rhode Island. It's revenue that goes to the town. We looked at that tax as a source of revenue. In South Kingstown, that's been used historically for open space. So that money that's dictated by state law that goes to South Kingstown, they have historically put that towards open space, but in the last 2 or 3 years, they've redirected that money to affordable housing. We considered that for Narragansett. The problem is that that money that we currently collect under that state law, I believe, goes to the general fund, and it's used to pay bills. So if that money was redirected to affordable housing or open space, the town council would need to find some way to replace those funds, either with budget cuts or additional taxes. So we didn't think that that was a good option, although that's still an option that the council could consider. We looked at the model of New Shoreham and Little Compton, who passed enabling legislation, which is what we're here to ultimately ask you to do too, which allows them to put a tax assessment on new properties that are bought, new residential properties. We think the advantage of this is that this would not be spread across all taxpayers. This would only come for people who are buying new properties. And we talked about a lot of conditions and parameters: exclude affordable housing, exclude the first 500,000 or 800,000. All those details can be done down the road if in fact the enabling legislation is passed. The enabling legislation that we would model after New Shoreham and Little Compton allows a town to charge up to 5% for new sales to go to these funds. You can put whatever parameters, conditions, restrictions you want on that once that enabling legislation is passed. So in terms of the progression of steps, and of course, you know, the legislature acts in a certain time frame and there are certain deadlines, our immediate goal is to try to get the town council to advance through our representatives the enabling legislation, which could then be put on the books. If it was passed, then you could decide, future councils could decide what the specific parameters would be. But we need to get the enabling legislation passed initially, and if we don't, then we can't take that avenue. There's still the other tax, the conveyance tax, the one that South Kingstown uses. But in the end, folks, we're trying to find additional sources of revenue because right now, while we have some money available, the two boards, we don't think it's sufficient to purchase land that's going to come up for sale, both for affordable housing and for open space. So, Cliff, do you want to jump in?
Sure, thank you, Terry. Mr. President, honorable town council members, Cliff Tyler, I'm the vice chair of the Affordable Housing Collaborative, or Trust Collaborative. I just want to talk a little bit first about the history of the Affordable Housing Trust. So, and I know all five of you, when you campaigned, affordable housing was one of the issues that you addressed. It's an important issue within the town. And the Affordable Housing Trust was established in 2007. To this date, it has never been capitalized by the town of Narragansett. So the town has contributed $0 over that 17, 18 years toward the Affordable Housing Trust, where some of the other boards in town get an annual allocation from the town council. Sure.
Mark, Terry, you guys get
$50,000.
50,000. I don't know if the whole council knows.
So that 500,000 is the accumulation over the years of the 50,000 and other money we've come up with.
Okay, I wanted to.
Yep, sure. No, so everybody's on the same page. But again, since 2007 is when the trust was established. Now, the need for affordable housing here in the town of Narragansett is tremendous. As we all know, as you've campaigned, as I talk to people within town, I've worn an affordable housing hat for close to 11, 12 years now. So I've dealt with all the towns and municipalities in Washington County as it comes to regarding affordable housing. And there's a state, the state of Rhode Island, or Rhode Island Housing publishes a list of that 10% goal that every town is targeted to achieve for affordable housing. The last chart that was published, Narragansett came in at 3.79%, which puts it in 30th place out of 39 municipalities. Okay, so 30th out of 39. The housing affordability gap has been increasing tremendously, especially for our local workforces. If you look at the median sale price of a home in the town of Narragansett for 2024, these numbers were just published last week by MLS, right? So in 2024, the median sale price for a single-family home was $275,000. $275,000, the median sale price. Last year, there were 149 sales, which was actually a drop from 2023 of about 27%. But the house cost, the price of houses went up to that $875,000, which was an increase year over year of 14%, which is above the state average. That number, $875,000, puts us in 5th place in the state of Rhode Island as the highest cost of housing. Above us are the known suspects: Block Island, Little Compton, Jamestown, and Newport. Those are the other 4 that are ahead of us, and that's kind of where we stand with that. Now, if you look at a family of 4 living in the town of Narragansett, according to HUD, the AMI, or the average median income for a family of 4 in the town of Narragansett, they could afford $323,000 mortgage. That's all they could afford if you were at 100% AMI for a family of 4. Now, if you had that $875,000 mortgage, or a house if you wish, you put down payment and all of that, your income that would need to support that would be $252,000 per household. I'm not sure how many folks in the town of Narragansett, especially employees, firemen, policemen, teachers, folks who work in highway, the folks that work in this building, folks that work at Celeste, or the other restaurants in town, how many of those are making as a family $252,000? So this gap, this is, there's a huge gap that's going on. If you look at what the Crane report, and you may have heard about the housing study that was issued last year, 2024, otherwise known as the Crane report, they actually looked at the numbers and said that 56% of the household owners in the town of Narragansett don't even live in town, right? They're out-of-town owners. So what does that mean, right? Are those second homes, or are those rental units, or investment units, whatever the case may be? But going back to that study, one of the things that I found valuable of it was at the end of the study, the Crane report lists 8 recommendations for the town of Narragansett to consider. Number 4 on the hit parade was adopting revenue streams to fund the Affordable Housing Trust. Again, it hasn't been done since 2007. The Affordable Housing Committee, Collaborative Trust, is very thankful for the voters in Narragansett to approve that $3 million bond. It's a great start. But I will tell you right now, and Mr. Durkin might be able to echo this too, to develop a single unit of affordable housing in the state of Rhode Island today, it's close to $500,000 per unit. $500,000 for a single-family home, or $500,000 for a single-family apartment, right? That $3 million doesn't go too far. So those are some of the facts I just kind of wanted to get out. So if we do nothing today to address the need for affordable housing, especially for those in our community and our workforce, then nothing's going to change, right? The affordability gap will continue to widen, and families won't be able to afford to live in this town. I grew up in South Kingstown, right next door. I spent most of my life here in Narragansett. My grandparents lived here, and it was truly a family community. And now this affordability gap is kind of stretching that. Less and less families will actually be able to afford to move into the town of Narragansett. So we need to take action now. If not now, then when, right? So Terry mentioned a couple different options for potentially funding sources for the Affordable Housing Trust and the Land Trust. I actually know of 7 that are actually viable options. I've done a lot of research on this. Actually, when I was appointed to the Affordable Housing Trust Collaborative 2.5 years ago, I actually started researching this topic. So I've been doing a lot of research over the last 2.5 years. And up until COVID, these trusts, these real estate transfer trusts, which is one of them, real estate transfer tax, if you wish, weren't really common. They started in 1982. In fact, there was a white paper published last year by the Institute of Taxation and Economic Policy out of Washington. And they talked about the history of these taxes. They started in 1982 with just New York being the first state that adopted these plans. Slowly, a couple other states started adopting municipalities. Here in Rhode Island, Little Compton in 1985 adopted theirs, and Block Island adopted theirs in 1986, right? One of the few early adopters. But it stayed rather quiet until about 2020, with the implosion, with the economy and the housing shortage, the housing crisis, if you wish. More and more municipalities started looking at how can we fund affordable housing, and taking a very corrective approach, or very proactive approach to it. So today, there are 16 states in the United States that have adopted real estate transfer tax. There are many, many other municipalities. And again, Terry mentioned a real estate transfer tax. He also mentioned a conveyance tax. Those are not mutually exclusive, right? You can have actually both. If you look at the state of New Jersey, The state of New Jersey has a very progressive conveyance tax, and I'll talk a little bit more about what those are, what conveyance tax is, and what the real estate transfer tax is. But they actually have both. So they have a mansion tax, and you'll hear a lot of folks, in the industry will talk about real estate transfer taxes as kind of a mansion tax. It's for those higher priced real estate properties, where those people who are buying them, like the $3.5 million house that just sold on Ocean Road and closed like 2 weeks ago, those folks might be able to afford paying an income tax or a real estate transfer tax, as opposed to a new family moving into the town of Narragansett that's looking for their first entry home, right? So I looked at MLS this morning. There are 18 active real estate properties, single-family properties in the town of Narragansett. The interesting thing with those 18, one is listed for $8 million, okay? And there's one for $275,000. It's a 444 square foot cottage down on Burnside, right? I'm not sure how many families are going to move in that, but the lowest price of a single family home was $650,000, right? So those, and that was a 1,248 square foot, 2-bedroom, 1-bath facility. Right now, over half of the properties that are listed on MLS are listed for over $1 million, over half, so 9 of the 18. So we've got a little bit of work to do, right? States that have adopted this real estate transfer tax include California, Connecticut, Hawaii, New Jersey, New York, Vermont, Washington State. Some of the big municipalities that have adopted this: Washington, D.C., Boulder, Colorado, and even here in Little Old Rhode Island, we've got Little Compton and Block Island that have established real estate transfer tax. So what does that mean? So, the real estate transfer tax is a tax that would be imposed on on the buyer of a property. When they buy it, when they go to do the recording of the deed, they would be responsible for that tax. And there are very, very different approaches to the tax. So Terry mentioned what Little Compton has done, what Block Island done. So to get into just a little bit of the specifics, so
Excuse me, let me just, and our discussions have been that the money would be apportioned between both funds.
Right.
In some way, shape, or form. Most of what Cliff's talking about, I think, go to affordable housing.
No, there is actually
Little Compton's actually all goes to open space.
So the original real estate transfer tax was targeted specifically at preserving land, right? That was back in the 80s, the 90s, where development was going on and people were trying to, stifle that development. And then now what's happening, I've seen two aspects. One is that current land trusts are actually portioning off part of their property for development, and then land trusts and affordable housing trusts partnering together to purchase land, keeping part of that as green space and keeping that, and part of that as developing affordable housing.
Right.
So the taxes that we would be proposing potentially that the town collect would go toward both funds, right? Let's preserve some green space, let's do some land conservation there, but also where can we develop more affordable housing in that? So Block Island is one of those locations. Right now, they tax 3% on real estate, right? Any real estate sale over the cost or over the price, transaction price of $100 gets charged this 3% real estate transfer tax. That goes 100% to their land trust.
The land trust.
Block Island also has a rental tax. So on any short-term rental of 6 months or less, 1% of the revenue generated to the landlord is paid in a tax that goes to their affordable housing trust over there, right? So that's how they approached it. Now, they do have a couple exemptions in Block Island. One of them is if you have a deed-restricted piece of property that's for affordable housing, then you're 100% exempt from any tax whatsoever for the real estate transfer tax. If you are a first-time home buyer, they actually have a step program where at certain stages of pricing, there's up to $200,000, just get into nitty-gritty, but Of a 200,000 is exempt from the tax, then you pay half the tax on the next $400,000, so you're at 600,000, and then after that, you're in the normal 3% range.
And we talked, the Land Trust talked at length about excluding, obviously, affordable, anything deed restricted would not be subject to this tax. We also talked at length about first-time buyers, because we want to encourage families to buy houses here and not be hit with additional taxes. At this stage, we thought that was difficult to enforce and to police, and we tried to keep it simple, but that's certainly something that you could put in as an exclusion. And then there's obviously the dollar
Yeah.
exemptions.
There's a couple of levers that you can, that the local municipality can control. That being, the percentage that they charge. So the underlying legislation that was passed in the state of Rhode Island for both Little Compton and Block Island, say that they can charge between 1% and 5%. Now, the local town councils in those jurisdictions can dictate what the percentage rate actually is that they're going to charge. They can also dictate what the exclusions are. So is it everybody in Little Compton, it's $500,000 or more that you pay the tax. Otherwise, if you're below 500, you don't. Or in the case of Block Island, they've said, we've excluded affordable housing and we've excluded first-time home buyers, right? So there's a lot of levers that you can play with in this. And if you look at other municipalities, when I looked at New Jersey's plan, they have a separate conveyance tax that has 6 different tiers to it. When I was trying to figure out how much a tax was on $1.5 million house, it took me about 10 minutes to kind of figure out, because it was the first tier gets this amount, the second tier gets this amount, and then on top of that, there's a mansion tax on top of that. So that's why I said they're not mutually exclusive. You can actually have both levers both options that you can play with.
Cliff, question real quick. The New Jersey structure that you talked about, is this statewide or is this more applicable to municipalities, let's say on the Jersey Shore communities?
It's
closer,
statewide.
To ours.
It's statewide, and then what some municipalities have done is they've put a superseding on top of that. So you'll see a lot of states will have a conveyance tax, and in some states the conveyance tax goes to affordable housing. In other states, the conveyance tax goes to the discretion of the local jurisdiction, right? So in the case of South Kingstown that
Conveyance tax.
Terry mentioned, yeah, so 23% of the conveyance tax. So in Rhode Island, let me explain conveyance tax real quick. It's a recording fee. If you purchase a house, you basically have to do a recording fee. It is $2.30 per every $500 worth of property value, up to $800,000. Once you hit that threshold of $800,000, anything over that is at double the price. The state of Rhode Island keeps $1.20 of that number.
Yeah.
So of the $2.30, the state of Rhode Island keeps that, and then the $1.10 goes back to the local municipality. So in the town of Narragansett, I believe that today goes into the general fund.
Goes in the general fund.
And in South Kingstown, what they've done is that we're keeping 23% for our general fund, and 77% of that goes back into either their land program or their affordable housing program. And in the last couple of years, I believe 100% of that has gone into affordable housing, but they still have the levers that they can pull. So, Mr. Collins, did you have a question?
So Rhode Island, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Rhode Island already has a transfer tax in general.
They have a conveyance tax.
Conveyance tax.
Which is, I call it, for a recording fee.
So is it
The
the governor
transfer-
then that has it in the new?
Jason, the transfer tax
So,
was passed for Little Compton and New Shore. Separate enabling
I
legislation.
thought the governor put it in this new budget for a transfer tax.
so there's two, go ahead. Right, so there's a bill that was submitted at the Senate. The same bill was submitted in 2003 and did not pass, right? And what it did was it created a separate conveyance tax that was dedicated strictly for affordable housing, and it could be up to $10 per $500 worth of value.
But that's not a transfer tax.
No,
That's a separate
it's a separate
conveyance tax.
conveyance tax. And in 2023, it was a conveyance tax of any property over $800,000. The bill that was submitted back last month, in the month of January, changed that number from $800,000 to $900,000. So the threshold went up a little bit, but otherwise the language is identical. And in addition to that, the governor has talked about a hotel tax, which is something completely different. But he's talking about, right now there's an exclusion for rentals, short-term rentals of single-family homes, the complete home. And he wants to take that exclusion away, because right now it only applies to rooms. So if you partial rent a room on short-term, so, okay. So those are, and so if you look across the country, there are lots of different ways that, this has kind of been adopted. Every municipality has looked at it differently. So these mansion taxes or these real estate transfer taxes, the thresholds are all over the board. If you look at the state of Illinois, there's a couple municipalities that have done it, not at the state level, but at their local level. And so they've, dictated saying, okay, anything over, $750,000 is what they're excluding. But you have to look at what is their median sale price for their homes, right? So those are levers that, again, you can control. And as Terry mentioned, this, in order to enable this legislation, it has to go to the state. It has to go to the state legislature. And then, basically, the council would draft not a recommendation, what is it? A resolution.
A resolution,
that
yeah.
would go to the state in order to enable an act to collect real estate transfer taxes, similar to what they've done
You would direct your representatives to submit the bill.
Right. So, questions?
And just, let me just, the levers, again, is down the road. I know people want to talk about that, but you would have full discretion to decide how many dollars up front are excluded from the tax, whether first-time buyers, affordable housing, those kinds of things. Obviously, when you get through all that modeling, you need to generate enough income to make it worthwhile. We did some modeling, which we'd be happy to do in a future workshop. Cliff did some great work, and the Land Trust looked at things. So that's down the road. But again, the enabling legislation has to be passed or nothing else can be done.
Well, I just want to say thank you both for the very thorough overviews and providing us with that general background. Super helpful, and I think both of you could easily run this meeting as I'm trying to do now. I definitely want to open up the floor to the rest of the council for questions. Before diving in, I did have some general overview questions. First of all, can you provide a little explanation of the interaction between the Affordable Housing Trust Collaborative and the Land Conservancy Trust, if there are other municipalities around the state where it sounds like one was favored over the other, and now we're looking at a resolution that would provide general support to both initiatives. I'm just trying to understand, because it sounds like Land Conservancy and affordable housing, there's two different agendas of each committee, and I'm just trying to understand how or where the general foundation of this recommendation come to the council is coming from.
I would say a lot of times people think that we're in conflict in terms of piece of property, and in fact, quite the opposite is true. We're actually looking at different pieces of property. And there are some properties that we would need some money to maybe jointly develop, some large properties that may have a lot of developable land, upland, and also have a lot of wetland and land that could be used for for open space. But we're essentially targeting different properties. Also, I think, I'll just speak for the Land Trust, our members are committed to advancing affordable housing in town, absolutely, and didn't want to initiate this tax without bringing the affordable housing group together. And we formed a subcommittee to work together on this because I think we support each other's missions quite strongly.
And thank you. And actually, to follow up, early on you had said, Mr. Fleming, in regards to this insufficient amount of funds that's currently being allocated to Land Trust. Do you have an approximate number in your head for what a sufficient amount would be?
I think Cliff told me the other day that New Shoreham has $7.5 million in
That's about
reserve.
right.
Oh, is that all?
Jump in.
We have 500,000, and I don't need to tell all of you what the price of property is in Narragansett. And when the land trust has a piece of property that they're interested in, that meets all of our criteria, we're often up against individual buyers, and it's being marketed to the public. And of course, you know what the prices are in Narragansett. Also, I know people have talked about grants that are available. Please understand that most, if not all, grants of that type, the municipality has to come to the table with some money. We can apply for grants, but we have to show whether we can match 30%, 40%, 50%. So we have to have money available. You can't just say grants are available. They are, and we're chasing them. But we need money to, and also this fund would enable us to go right to the council and say, we have a piece of property, or they have a piece of property that we want to buy, and you would have the discretion to cut those funds loose. Right now, the two bonds that we have take a long, long time to trigger and to get the funds available. So.
And if I could just address the question you'd asked a moment ago, Mr. President. There are, in the town of Little Compton, they have seen a huge exodus of young people. So about a year and a half, 2 years ago, their land trust and their affordable housing trust got together. And so what they're doing now is they're taking land that was preserved, and they're now making that available as part of a land lease program so they can develop affordable housing on those properties that were purchased and acquired for preservation. And I've seen that all across the country. Just last week, the city of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, announced the development of a land trust to develop and preserve land, but also develop housing for their workforce. Because a lot of their employees that work in the city of Myrtle Beach, I don't know if any of you have been to Myrtle Beach, it's a beautiful place, but they're commuting outside, and it's just too expensive to live in, so that's why they're developing this land trust. And I've seen examples of this all across the country.
So would it be a general assumption to believe that it would be the agreed upon terms between these two committees that would be the mission here to, quote, preserve and develop land, that you would purchase property collectively to then develop affordable housing? I'm just trying to understand the interaction between the two.
I wouldn't make that as a no, I think there's certain pieces of property that are so big that if they became available, they would be able to serve both missions to some degree. But, I mean, we're going to continue to look for individual pieces of property that will be blended into our green space. And it probably, based on our criteria, are not developable. They're highly wetlands, and they're more appropriate for us. So I wouldn't make a blanket. I think we support all that, but it would have to be a unique piece of property that we would jointly develop, I think.
And the relationship between both trusts is fairly new. I mean, Terry, you've been board chair for what, about a year?
Yeah.
So that's really when it developed, right? That there was some openness to actually looking at preserved land and saying, we can still preserve some, but we could also develop. I mean, there's a parcel up in Exeter that was 8-acre parcel that they put in 3 acres of affordable housing, and they preserved the other 5 acres for green space. So there's collaboration going on.
So again, I ask because we're all relatively new here. If a piece of property became available and we're supporting this initiative, this resolution, who gets to decide if it goes to affordable housing or land trust?
Well, I think we would have to evaluate.
In this situation.
Right, if there's viability on that piece of property to actually build, right?
Yeah.
Because there are 9,000 acres in the town of Narragansett, and over 50% of those have wetlands on them. They're not buildable, period. Or they're preserved.
This is to generate revenue to the two funds, to continue to look for their own pieces of property. If something came up unique that could be jointly developed, that's one thing. But generally, we're going to try to continue to pursue our own missions here.
Would you like to add?
Yeah, I just want to add something. The Affordable Housing Trust Collaborative presently has $10, And so we're working really hard to build that fund, and that's why we did the $3 million bond. But we have a long way to go, and I was on the land trust for a period of time, and I compliment and commend them for preserving the land. There's about 300 acres preserved. We're a little bit behind the 8 ball on the affordable housing side. So we're too looking for a stream of revenue in that Crane report that you all have. That is a recommendation that we should figure out a way to be funded, so that bond isn't just going to do it for us. So we could do things jointly, but we definitely are behind them, so we are trying to build our fund and trying to get a source for us to, and I think part of the budget should supply that to the Affordable Housing Trust each year, just like they do with the Land Trust. So that's just my piece, and I'm glad we're working together. But in the past, we've had them come, and it was a different chair at a different time. We've seemed to be working and have subcommittees together, and I think that's great. I like to see more of that, but I think our goals are a little bit different. Sometimes they're preserving, we're trying to develop, and that's as honest as I can be. So when the projects meet in the middle and there's an opportunity, yes, but they're not always going to meet in the middle.
And I just one point of clarification too, because the Affordable Housing Trust is more than just about purchasing or developing land. Right? We have a host of programs that we're looking to launch. We're going to be meeting with the bond attorney next week to make sure these programs would fit under the auspices of the bond. So things like first-time home buyer assistance, things like education programs, things like ways to either preserve existing affordable housing. So the funds that the trust would get are more than just for land purchase or land development. There are a whole host of other programs that we'd be looking to initiate and run, like a lot of the other land affordable housing trusts across the country do.
Can I just ask a quick question? I'm just curious, is there currently any land that's preserved? You talked about, using land to have affordable housing and be able to preserve the land if you can find something to come together. Is there anything currently now that we have that we can do something like that with?
There's conservation easements, preservation easements on all the properties that we currently oversee. And I don't know what could be done to develop those existing properties. Yeah, I mean, something you'd have to look at, but we put in place over the past few years under the leadership of the previous Land Trust Chair, Tom Rogers, a number of provisions that would protect any of the properties that we have from development.
Before moving on to another counselor, do you have any other questions? I can come back as well. Well, Councilor Colonies, I know you're ready to go.
So when I think about this, I was on the land trust. I love being on the land trust. But when I think about, if I'm looking at a lot that's buildable, one of our criteria when we were looking at land was not to go after that buildable land. It was like a prime directive for us. So like I would think that if we're looking at buildable land, only the Affordable Housing Committee would be looking at buildable land.
Pretty much, yep. Yep. That's why I said we're looking at different pieces of property for the most part.
I mean, the land we were looking at when I was on the land trust was small lands to connect trails together, things of that nature.
I think if you had a very large parcel, like 5 or 6 acres, something of that nature, where there might be some wetlands on it, then it's a different, but there may be some buildable space, different scenario, right?
Mm-hmm. And it was all about how much it was in our coffers too, as well.
Right.
So.
Right.
Do you have any other questions?
But okay, go ahead.
Councilor Durkin, do you have any questions?
I was surprised when Terry informed me of his plan when we were campaigning, and we had some words and talked about it a little bit, and
We had words, Jim?
well,
Discussion.
discussion.
Yeah, imagine that.
And, it's nice to see that Alex and Donna have both thought the same way I thought, because it just seemed like it was like two people that should be kind of like fighting with each other instead of coming together. And it seems like it's a nice thing if it's really meant to happen. But I think like Donna's question right there, like, are there pieces right now that are owned by the land trust that you would put forward as a, you know, as a, I don't know, as a good gesture? Because, you know, I don't believe all of those parcels are restricted. I think that's what we've said, you know.
They are. I mean, we can get into the detail
Yeah, they-
about each
yeah.
one, okay?
Everything is.
Well, I mean, again, I don't want to quote it chapter and verse, but we can get into that. But
Yeah.
you know,
Well, take, for instance, Kinney Avenue. Is that all restricted? I thought we just bought that as a town and bought that.
yeah,
without
I'd have to look at what easements and preservation easements were put on. I'd have to look at that.
Yeah, because, I don't know, it just seems like, I don't know how it would actually work, but it seems like if you really were, you know, if you really wanted to do it that way, then you would have already done it, you know? But you know, I guess we'll have to, I'll have to
We have
think
the
about that.
mission of open space and protecting green space and developing trails and those things.
Yeah, no, I get
We don't want to shortchange that by any
Yeah,
means.
no, I get that, and it's good that you're saying that out front, because that's kind of the way I thought, you know? So I'm confused on why you're together on the proposition, but that's okay.
Well, I think we're together because I think the transfer tax idea would generate revenue for both missions. And I think it would require one piece of enabling legislation and an ordinance from you folks. And then both funds could benefit from this rather than us trying to generate revenue our separate ways. Doesn't mean we use it for the exact same pieces of property. It just means that it's a way to generate revenue for both.
After, like, say if the council decided to go forward with it and then it got passed through the State House, does it go to the voters to vote on too? Does it have to go on the ballot?
Well, I think you would have public hearings to set whatever provisions or restrictions on the,
Yeah.
I would assume.
Yeah, I don't think it requires, I don't know,
I don't think it would. I mean, we
Requires
could
it,
ask the solicitor, but I think it's an ordinance by you once remember, as Cliff said, the enabling legislation is up to 5%. That's all it says.
Yeah.
And then you can do the levers, if you will, inside of that.
Yeah.
And you could direct different percentages to the two. We've come together as a subcommittee and said, let's come forward with 50-50. You could do different things. It's up to you.
yeah. We both have definitely different missions, but we both have a common need to have a revenue stream.
Right.
That's really, at the
That's
end
why
of
it's
the day,
here.
is what it's.
So you're not really talking about a partnership?
Well, no, we are talking about potentially partnership on parcels, but we also have our additional, you know, as I mentioned, we're not just parcels, right? We're talking, you know, there's 2 pages of programs that we're vetting out right now. And one of them is buying land. The other page and a half is, you know, all different kind of programs.
There's always been the talk about doing things together depending on the property. And some people very much disagree, because I've had discussions over the year, but there's a very large parcel of federal land in the southern end of town that if it ever became available, you know, has sufficient wetlands and upland, and it's big enough that both items could be done with that. But right now, we're looking at certain parcels in town, and they're, you know, 10,000, 20,000 square feet. We just want to add them to the green space because they're in
They're bordering.
and they abut land we already have, and they're connected to our trails. So those aren't properties that we would ever go there, but some big piece of property, you know, the town could absolutely do that.
So what was the last piece of land that the Land Conservancy asked the town to buy, or you bought yourself?
No, not Middlebridge, the piece on
South Pier Road?
South Pier Road, I think. I think that was the
So-
one that connected to part of Crooked Brook.
Right.
That was the last one that we've,
So where'd the money come from?
I believe that was just in our reserves, Jim.
So it came
Don't
from-
quote me on that. The middle bridge was from the bond. We had a $2 million bond, and we used $1 million to buy Middle Bridge. We still have $1 million in that. But I believe the last property we bought on South Pier was from the reserve,
Okay, so that was money that was saved up that, of the 50s?
which we have about 500,000 now.
Right. So the Middle Bridge parcel has restrictions on it? And why are there restrictions on that? Like,
Because it's preserved as open space, so it's not supposed to be developed anymore.
and do we choose that?
Yeah.
Oh, we
yeah.
chose to do
Oh,
that?
absolutely, yeah.
Oh.
Council did, right. You can't undo those things. Those easements are rightfully so pretty solid.
To speak on the tax, what are some of the levers that you recommend for Narragansett? What stipulations? You had mentioned earlier, first-time home buyers. but-
Affordable,
If it's
Well,
deed
what do you-
restricted,
deed restricted.
Okay.
they would be 0%, they would never pay a tax if it was deed restricted.
We kicked around the first 500,000 being exempt, first 800, first million, and then Cliff did some great modeling to show how much revenue would be generated, like with 1% after that or 2% after that, if you took out the first 800,000. You don't want to deter first-time buyers or families from buying property. You don't want to add an extra tax to those people. But if it's a $3 million property and you're exempting the first 800,000 or $1 million, then to charge somebody 1 or 2% for the next 2 million, I mean, you decide. That's,
And the thing to remember, too, is that this is a one-time tax, right? This is just
Yeah.
when they do the deed transfer, right? When they do the recording, that's when the tax is collected. It's not a consistent tax or, like a regular property tax. It's a one-time deal. So, there's should be no concerns. The taxpayers of the town of Narragansett
Right.
won't be impacted by any of, like with the real estate transfer.
which is one of the things that guided us, was not to charge everybody in town to fund these funds, but maybe to find a way to charge, as Cliff said, the mansions, the higher priced properties.
You had mentioned first-time home buying being unenforceable. Could you just talk a little
No,
more
we
about-
just kicked around. It's hard to police, and who's going to police that? And some people want to not tell the truth that this is actually the first house they've ever bought. But, I think it's good to talk about excluding first-time buyers. It's just, we thought it was just cumbersome.
Yeah, and Black Island has some good language around that, though. So under penalty of perjury, but they exclude a first-time home buyer ever in their life, anywhere in the world, right? So they truly are a first-time home buyer, and they have to attest to that. And then they do get an exemption for it. But it's only good if they decide to sell that property within 5 years, then they need to pay the tax that would have been collected. So there's certain, again, another lever that
Yeah, you
have
guys can do what you,
that you can say, that if you buy this as your first-time home buyer and you flip it in 6 months or a year or 5 years, that tax is now come due, right? So,
Okay, thank you.
Being mindful of time, I'll allow, if you have one or, do you have another question?
Mr. President, we may have some board members that want to make a comment. I don't know if there's time. If there's not,
I mean, ideally, we'll schedule another work session, and we can open it up to more
Okay.
members. I just want to be mindful as we make this transfer over to the regularly scheduled meeting.
Yeah.
The one last, and I wish I had known that at the start, I would have planned that out a little bit better.
That's okay.
But just for our feedback here, I think the recommendation that was agreed upon was that a resolution would be presented and that we would vote upon it and then pass it up. Do you have a resolution that you guys have worked on before, or that?
we would have.
We'll develop it.
draft them.
All
We'll
right.
develop it. In consultation with council.
The other thing that comes to mind is timelines, recommendation to our state representatives. I feel like we may have, already be behind for this legislative session in regards to getting this accomplished in this
So towns
session.
can delay it a little bit, so
What did they say, Cliff?
But I
What was it?
believe it's toward the latter part of
April.
that we would need to get it submitted. So we do have a good 6 weeks to play with here.
Okay.
If we
After
got
that-
back to you in March with a draft resolution, that would be our goal, obviously.
So then, if that's the case, you said, I'm sorry, March? So then ideally, we would probably have our second work session somewhere towards the latter half of March.
Or you would be in agreement, hopefully, with the resolution, and you would pass it on to the reps, and they could get it up, as Cliff said, by April. The legislature needs something to act on.
Okay, excellent. Well, I think that's going to conclude the work session for this evening. Really appreciate both the Affordable Housing Trust Collaborative and Land Conservancy Trust for their participation in providing us with that very valuable feedback, and we look forward to continuing to make progress on this initiative, and we'll work together at the next work session.
Thank you.
Thank you.